I think we're live, so we can kick off. Good evening and good afternoon, wherever you are. And welcome to this session on tracking and cookies and digital privacy. This is Nikhil, Gupta, and I lead the retail and media analytics practice for EXL Analytics in the UK and Europe. And I have along with me Oliver Paton. Oliver, if you could give a quick introduction to yourself.
Hi guys, I'm Oliver Paton. I've been working in digital analytics and optimization for coming on to 16, maybe 17 years now. I've been working with EXL for coming up to 3 years. And as I say, I've been working in digital analytics, optimization, and I've done quite a big stint within the media environment as well in ad operations. Great.
Well, thanks, Oliver. And just so that I just wanted to kind of give a brief introduction before we get into the topic itself. The session is meant to be a little bit more interactive. So we will have a few poll questions as we go through. We will take questions as we go along, and we'll try to answer them at the back end of the session. So before we get into the specifics of the topic, we had a curious question in our minds, and we thought, let's ask people what they think. We asked people on LinkedIn that in 2022, Chrome browser may actually be using the guise of user privacy as a scapegoat to make changes to Chrome and further monopolize digital advertising. Now, we purposefully framed the question this way because we knew that the audience we would actually be reaching out to would be people who are familiar with how the technology works, and most of our connections are in the analytics space. We were curious how people would respond. What do you think? What percentage of people actually said yes, they will consider changing their browser? We'll take a moment for your votes to come in.
No cheating by looking on LinkedIn. Ah, interesting.
Interesting. Almost a third, well, 44% thought 33%, which is interesting, which is what you would think rationally. If people know how advertising works, they know that it's not that dangerous and that it is not going to be a power grab in the new sense. But what we actually found was it was 50%. And that tells you that when you think as a consumer, it actually changes the way you approach things rather than as someone who's a marketer and as a rational thinker. So with that background in mind, I'll pass it on. Oh, actually, I'll actually give you a little bit of a brief introduction, and then I'll pass it on to Oliver to kind of talk through what digital privacy means from an actual implementation and actual day-to-day practice perspective. So as you all know, the advertising market is roughly about $400 billion globally, and it is very much affected by how we measure things, how we target things. And over the last few years, there's been legislation that's been developed, which is trying to restrict the way people can browse, people can track, advertisers can track people, and advertisers can target people. And this is in the interest of public safety, privacy. And the largest internet companies and browser providers are also using the same principle and direction of travel to then adapt the same privacy measures into their technology. However, this has been a fragmented approach. Google has taken a separate approach. Apple has taken another, Firefox, and so on and so forth. All the major players in the market have taken their own way of tackling the problem of providing more and more privacy to their users. And that is now coming to a head with one of the largest players, that is Google, deciding to become cookieless or third-party cookieless. And therefore, this topic is now become front and center of most of the large marketing companies and also, the everyday marketer. With that in mind, I'll pass it on to Oliver to kind of talk us through what it means in terms of practice of digital privacy.
Cool, thank you, Nikhil. So yeah, there's two different areas that we kind of think about, we've broken out into two areas for privacy. The first is consent legislation, and that is basically the the legal requirement to gather a customer's permission before capturing and using their data, and specifically storing data on their device. And that really refers to cookies, although it may refer to other technologies that would enable tracking to identify a specific browser or visitor. And in the UK, that's PECR. In California, that's CCPA. And that's kind of driving advertisers and websites to gain consent from the customer. This isn't the area that we're going to focus on today, but it is an area that we've been extensively working in with many of our clients. And for our next poll, I just wanted to understand out there, for those of you that work on websites or work on multiple websites, do you have a consent management platform in place? Do you think that you're fully compliant with that that legislation? Just kind of curious to understand where people are at in this process. When we talk about this as well, it's very much a specific consent management platform and explicit opt-in. Especially in the UK, you have to specifically opt in to analytics tools and marketing tools. Okay, good. Seems like most people are covered, 67%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. And then the second area that we focus on, and we're going to focus on today primarily, is the way that browsers are changing their the way that they work, the way that they allow third parties to collect data and process data. Over the last 12 years, lots of things have been changing. There's lots of drivers around that. So there's the Cambridge Analytica activity that potentially, it definitely influenced certain votes in recent history, and that's definitely driven awareness around privacy. And the browser vendors and big tech vendors are really looking to use privacy as a driver to encourage people to use their technology. So on that note, let's move to the next slide. Oh, we've got one next question. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about this one. So the next poll question is to try and understand, do you have a plan already to deal with the cookieless future? Are you thinking about different ways you can, or understanding the impact to start with, and going forward, understanding what mitigations you might need to take to try and protect your data, protect your audiences, and mitigate your keep your market share?
Yeah, and this is just absolutely, and this would just allow us to understand how this group is actually thinking about the cookieless or third-party cookieless future. Wow, well, then you're in the right place. A bunch of people haven't had plans, and that's good, at least that you've taken the first step to pick up on what's needed. With that, I think we should dive into the actual specifics of,
Yeah, sure. So we'll start with defining cookie types and kind of explaining how cookies worked historically and currently in Chrome, obviously, how digital privacy is changing and how browsers are, have slowly been making changes to the way they work, the overall implications on different parts of the marketing stack, and things that you might want to start thinking about in terms of mitigating the potential impacts. And the last thing we'll touch on is the Google specific solutions that they're talking about providing, with some recent information that we've received from Google. We've been talking to them for quite a while on how things are progressing. and have a kind of recent update from this week that we can share. So cookies are stored on your browser as you browse around the internet. And the term first party and third party relates to who's setting them. So if you're on a website and you're an advertiser, your website is, let's say, example.com, then if you're setting an example.com cookie, that's a first party cookie. Whereas if you have an advertising system that is responsible for serving an ad, that is actually hosted by an ad server, let's call it adserver.com, then that adserver.com would also be allowed currently to set cookies on that example.com website when the customer or when the user hits that web page. So we then have, and in this instance, you'll see everything in green, that's a first party cookie. And then everything in red is the third party cookie. And in this case, they're all set by Google. So you've got google.com and doubleclick.net, which is also a Google domain. These third party cookies can be set in two ways. First way is a server side cookie that's set from the first party server, or they're set via JavaScript. And that uses a function called document.cookie, which means that the JavaScript that's embedded in the page will set the cookie for you. All of these different cookies and the way they're set will have different implications. The browser changes will have different implications based on how they're set. Primarily, first-party cookies are safe. We're not talking about getting rid of first-party cookies, and they're typically responsible for remembering that the customer's signed in, or remembering some selections that you've made on a product page so that you can carry that through into the purchase journey and check out with those products. So all the legislation is around.
Sorry, carry on.
As you say, all the changes in browser are targeting third-party cookies, which are primarily set by either tools you install or ad servers or ad technology. Sorry, Nikhil, you were going to say?
Yeah, I was just saying that this is relevant for both publishers as well as advertisers, right? Because I'm assuming our audience has a mix of both.
Yes, it would be, yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So very quickly, this one. So the way an ad server will work is you're on example.com, which is let's say a publisher website. There's an advert there, and the ad server will drop a cookie on your browser. You then click through on the ad, and you get to the advertiser site, and you purchase. And when you purchase, the ad server JavaScript will pick up the cookie, and it will match the publisher side banner click to the advertiser side sale, and it will link the two things together and count a conversion. So that's how conversion tracking will work for an ad server. But imagine this ad server is serving across thousands of websites, and it's actually able to build a massive profile. If you're browsing thousands of websites, it will build a massive profile of all of your browsing data. And so they'll hold a massive amount of information. And I guess that's something that the browsers are kind of looking to erode away through the measures they're putting in place. As you mentioned, these changes have been going on for a long while. So initially there was an attempt at called Do Not Track, which was across all browsers. It didn't really work very well. And since then, browsers have kind of gone their separate ways, and we've ended up with this kind of sporadic and distributed solutionizing of ways to deal with privacy. So from 2013, third-party cookies have started to be blocked or limited in Safari. Firefox has created a cookie blacklist, 2015. In 2017, we started getting ITP, which is Intelligent Tracking Prevention, in Safari, and they've continued to develop that into this year, and they're continuing as we speak to kind of develop that in both Safari and in iOS. They're making obviously limitations to the way that you can be tracked in cross apps as well. And obviously the biggest one that we're talking about at the moment is Chrome, and their announcement in 2019 to completely get rid of third-party cookies in 2022.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned earlier, there is also a move within the operating systems to get away from being able to track. So a lot of people will be familiar with the IDFA way of tracking within the Apple ecosystem, or the Apple iOS ecosystem to be precise. And that is also becoming more and more restrictive, or at least more and more obvious to customers, that it is that applications will use your information to track you across your usage in the device. And the way it's framed, and it's a very recent change, but the way it's framed, it seems like the take-up of people saying, yes, please allow this app to track me, is going to be limited, and that's also going to have a big impact on the way how advertising, targeting proceeds in the future.
Yeah, and since whilst we're looking at timelines as well, so my latest word from Google is that there's lots of caveats around this statement, but they're originally aiming for February 2022. There is some doubt from our rep on whether they'll hit that deadline or not, but they are going to keep us up to date. The one thing they said is they're not going to remove cookies and remove support for cookies without having some sort of replacement. But it may slide on that deadline. So what does this mean by browser? So from our data sets, and it does vary between what website we're talking about. So I've heard estimates of Chrome share being between 45 and 65. So we took a look at several of our client websites and kind of averaged it together to get these rough estimates. But it's around 45% of browsing traffic is using Chrome or Chromium-powered browsers. So they're already enforcing. So last year they started enforcing same site. So if a browser is labeled with same site, then it won't be accessible across multiple domains. They've already started looking at anti-fingerprinting measures. And obviously in 2022, they will start deploying the privacy sandbox, which we will cover in a bit more detail. Second, in order of importance, according to our average data, again, is Safari, where we're already seeing third-party cookies are blocked across cross-domain for cross-domain tracking purposes. There's a seven-day cap on all locally written or document.write written cookies. And that includes anything that you've tried to do to get around using cookies. So if you tried to use local storage, for example, or if you tried to fingerprint, that's no longer going to work. And then we very quickly kind of tail off into Firefox, where third-party cookies are blocked by default. You can reactivate them again, but they're mostly already blocked. And Internet Explorer, interestingly, they've said that user controls are coming for third-party cookies, but actually it's very likely that they'll follow suit with Chrome, because Internet Explorer, or Microsoft Edge, as it's now known, is a Chromium-based browser. That means that it basically inherits a lot of the changes that happen in Chrome. So it's very likely that they'll follow suit around whatever happens. I'm not too sure what the window is in terms of how long they leave to inherit those changes, but it will happen after the initial Chrome changes happen.
And as a tangential question, really, does Safari, do you think, already have something in view of having third-party cookies, or is it completely clean or clear of third-party cookies, in which case things like retargeting is probably not possible. Is that completely zero, or is this something that is there inherent in the browser itself? How do you think that's played out? Because that could
Yeah,
be
so you
wind into
can
the
set
future.
you can set a third-party cookie, but I think it's capped on a time period, and they have changed the time periods. We've got a table on that somewhere. I don't think we've got it in this deck, but I'd have to share that later.
Okay.
I think it's 24 hours off the top of my head, but I'd have to double check that. Cool. So in terms of impact by business case, so we've kind of broken this into 4 different areas. So we think that front and foremost, programmatic marketing, the marketing area is going to be impacted the most. So ad servers that operate across multiple sites are going to have the largest area of impact. Reduced capability for retargeting without any, if we just take it at face value, just looking at cookies without any replacement technology. And data management platforms that currently rely on cookie matching are definitely going to be severely damaged in terms of their capability. And from what we're seeing in the market, a lot of those technology vendors are maneuvering in a way that really puts them more into the DMP, the customer management platform space, as opposed to a DMP space. So they're kind of expanding the scope of how they operate, so that they can consume more customer data, and hopefully they'll have more longevity in the solutions they provide. A/B testing and optimization. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, Oliver. On the programmatic bit, obviously this is we're usually looking at things from a marketer's perspective, but are there going to be impacts by different parts of the value chain? So if you're an ad network or if you're a publisher, how does this play out for you?
So the way that Google have explained the technology that is part of the constituent parts of the privacy sandbox, the advertising networks and the publishers will be responsible for all the integration work. So the work sits on those guys. So the advertiser,
a lot of the work then is actually on their side then.
Yeah, as an advertiser, we won't have to worry, and that even includes Google, right? So Google, the way they've explained it is they have Chinese walls, and there's the part of the business that creates Chrome is very separate to the part of the business that runs advertising and is the biggest revenue stream. And what they've told me is that even the advertising side of the business receive announcements around an hour before they're publicly given on their website and on their blogs. So even the advertising systems at Google need to be updated so they work with the browser changes. So in a way they've created work for themselves, which is great. They have to do the integrations on their side for the main part. It feels like it might penalize some of the smaller players in the industry a little bit more, because they'll have to figure out themselves. They won't have the scale and development teams to do that work. But it is great news that the advertiser won't have to do too much. And the way that they're envisaging it is that a lot of it will, from a Google perspective, Google advertising perspective, a lot of it will be plug and play with the current tools. So the retargeting system, for example, it's envisaged that might work through Google Analytics. So you create a segment in Google Analytics, and that would feed back into the browser, and the browser would then be able to retarget the customer when they're on another site. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool, good. So the next two, so A/B testing and optimization and personalization tools typically will work on first-party cookies, so they're probably safe. Not all of them will be working with first-party cookies, so it's worth checking with your vendor. And it's possible for you, if they are using third-party cookies, to either update. So an example might be Optimizely, as an optimization platform, will use a third-party cookie, but you can program it to use your first-party customer identifier, for example, which is great because you can target the customer and you can test against the customer. So even if they browse on multiple devices, they'd be put into A or B of your test, and they'd have a unified experience across different devices and different browsers. So definitely something worth looking into, just to double check that the systems you're using are using first-party cookies. On-site personalization, again, it depends on which system you're using. If you're using a third-party system, then it may again be using third-party cookies, so worth checking. But from my experience, they can use first-party cookies, and you can modify them to use first-party cookies, so they're probably going to be safe in the longer term. Web analytics, again, so the majority of Adobe clients that I've worked with and I've seen, they use CNAME mapping, which means that the cookie for Adobe Analytics will be seen by the browser as a first-party cookie, so it's probably safe. But if you're an Adobe client, then check that you're using a CNAME map and your cookie is set as a first-party cookie, and it will make it more resilient to these changes. Google Analytics, the recommendation is to upgrade to the G tag if you're not already there, which you should be because it's been a while. And then there are also updates in Google Tag Manager server side that enable you to set the first-party cookie from the server using Google Tag Manager. And there's a great post out there online by Simo Ava, who's a web analytics expert who can explain exactly how to do that. So if you're a Google Analytics client, it's definitely worth checking that out. Cool. Nikhil, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So in essence, I mean, what I understand is the move away from third-party cookies is going to impact the programmatic marketing the most, as you mentioned, because that's the thing that requires use of third-party data to the maximum. From what I've gathered, there are no single solutions, and that there are multiple things out there. What I've tried to do here is take a sense of what those solutions are, and maybe we can discuss a bit more about what people can do now, what people can do in the future. So in terms of, from what I understand, there are two key ways in which browsers work from a targeting perspective, that you can either target an authenticated visitor or an unauthenticated visitor. And then there are forms of targeting which does not require cookies. So for example, mobile application-based targeting. So when we look at authenticated tracking, it seems that should not be impacted because well, when I say authenticated, even within that, you could have two ways of thinking, whether you've signed in which case you are known to the marketer and the publisher, in which you can probably target them based on whatever information you've provided and your consent that you've provided. But outside of that, there would be other solutions which allows ad networks to target, and these are solutions which are fairly complicated when they try to build them up and aggregate them up. So you will have something like a single ID solution, for example, where a bunch of publishers could actually share their first-party information after collecting user consent to a centralized company, which can then use that as pretty much similar to what cookies do today, but just that in this case, the user would have provided the consent to the publisher to allow that data to be used in that fashion. And then I think there is the second order collection of that information, which is aggregator of aggregators, who try to create some form of probabilistic way of doing it. Is there anything that you'd like to add, Oliver, to this sort of way of thinking in the first instance, which is when you try to get consent from users? And do you think this is going to succeed?
Good question. Yeah, I think it's going to be tricky because obviously it means that the customer has to authenticate. And I think primarily what these systems are proposing on using is your email address. So that means, does that mean as a user, I have to log in on every single site that I use? If I go to a news website,
practically,
I have to authenticate. And we see that trend already. We see quite a few news websites where, they're asking you to log in and they're actually monetizing the content via a subscription as opposed to via advertising. But it doesn't feel like a great user experience to me across the web, having to log into every single website.
Yeah, this is interesting because as a marketer, you would think differently, but as a consumer, you would think completely differently, which is interesting, and which is what kind of harks back to the first question we asked in the poll. So that's kind of one way of looking at it, which is just asking customers to actually say, yes, please use my data to target me better. And then there are this entire set of solutions which are anonymous by definition, that does not require any consent, and therefore does not actually technically track the user at a user level. And the first one, it's obvious that they probably just want to go back to better contextual targeting and go back to basics. That does not require any specific knowledge of the user, and therefore you could target ads based on what's on the actual web page. And then the other is this complicated story around what Google is doing, and maybe we could get into that a little bit later, as you mentioned in your last section. I believe this is probably more realistic because, as you said, the first one would add value, but has a lot more friction points and a lot more people to collaborate. It requires a lot more people to collaborate across the board to create those IDs. At least that's what I would take away from an execution perspective. And then obviously the non-cookie based advertising, while it does not get impacted, as I mentioned earlier, the new OS solutions that are coming up are actually making it harder for apps to track you on different OSs. In fact, the new latest Android 12, and they've done away with alphabets for some reason. I think they've run out of sweets. The new beta versions come out, and that also seems to have enhanced privacy measures. So I think the general direction of travel would be the same that we're seeing in iOS, and that may have even greater impact. So I think that's, and obviously some of the data points that we kind of use anyway, which is weather, events, news, etc., which marketers do leverage to target people, would continue to be available to them because that's public information, and again, does not require specific user consent or user targeting. With that in mind, I think what we could do is probably look at things that should already be in place and things that we could do as advertisers to sort of plan for this unknown future in some way.
Yeah, so here I've put a couple of things that I think you should already have in place. So you should have already labeled your first-party cookies and third-party cookies in order of with the same site methodology. That should have been done last year. Setting your cookies server-side where possible. So we've already talked about optimization and analytics tools. So CNAME mapping for your Adobe, setting your Google Analytics script using Google Tag Manager server-side, or potentially trying to, in other systems, using some sort of duplication of IDs in your local storage. Probably won't work anymore given the measures they're putting in place, but that was an older suggestion. And ensure that your marketing tracking, your first party marketing tracking that goes into Google, your tagging is really good. So in some cases, you might have a partnership with a small website and they're passing in parameters to your website. that doesn't necessarily require an ad server. You can just pay them based on the traffic you receive and measure into Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics. And that's still going to work. It's all first party data and it's handed over directly from one site to another in the URL. So you still own that data. So making sure that all of that data is collected in a clean way. I know that sounds really simple, but I see many clients who don't have great first-party marketing data that they're capturing on those URLs, and it's either not tracked or it's in a really bad structure. So I tend to review that and try and make it nice and clean. Bit of a perfectionist as an analyst, it makes things a lot easier in the future if you've done all that work up front and set it properly. Next, reduce your dependency on cookies. So we're talking about a lot with clients around customer management platforms and consuming first-party data and then being able to target that or share it to walled gardens. So for example, Facebook. It's something that's existed for a long time, but really investing in a CMP could scale it up a lot more. You can consume more data, you can automate it, you can make it more real time, and you have a tool that's fit for purpose. I'm not saying it's not possible to do it in other means, but a CMP is definitely worth considering. Another potential is serving your own ads. So you pay for the privilege of serving your ads via a Google ad server or any other ad server. So there could potentially be potential for you to serve your own ads from your own servers, and that could save you some money, and you could cut out the middleman. Yeah, and implement, I think probably the next and most important one is to start thinking about Google SANDBOX. I think probably ones that I've missed here are understanding what advertising is actually going to be impacted or potentially impacted, which partners you use, how much you spend with them, and whether you serve ads on your website yourself. So you might not just be an advertiser, but you could be a publisher, it could be a mixture of both, and how much revenue could potentially be impacted. Google say that publishers could potentially lose up to 50% if you weren't able to personalize the ads that are served with your content. That seems extreme to me, but our estimates with quite a few of our clients are way lower than that. But that's what they say. So definitely start considering how much you might be impacted.
It's interesting that when you say personalization, is that personalization of content or is that personalization of the individual? As in, is it about serving it to you at the right time at the right place versus what it looks like?
Both of those things, yeah. So if you were just doing blanket buys, the publisher would make less money out of it because you wouldn't have the data, and you would have way lower conversion rates off the back of it. So the publisher would get paid far less. That's what they're insinuating. It seems a lot though, 50%. I guess personalization and targeting is pretty amazing, but 50% of the revenue, not sure. Have to take their word for it. I'm sure they've got some basis behind it.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Let's take the sales pitch for a little bit of a sales pitch.
Yeah, was
so
the guys from?
Into...
Yeah, let's go for it.
So, yeah, we should dive into what Google is doing. So over to you. Back to you, Oliver.
Sure. So there's 4 APIs that 5 really, but I explained that. But 4 that are kind of really important to us as advertisers. So the first is the conversion API, which helps attribute sales without cookies. And as opposed to doing this cookie clicked on a ad and this cookie then converted type calculation, it will make sure that there's high enough volumes in groups to of ads and ad clicks before it starts reporting. So if you had an ad and you had an ad that was very only served, say, to one place, and you had one click on it, you probably won't get data for that ad, and you won't get success. So it needs volume to start reporting, and it will group browsers into cohorts to report on. It's something that we will probably have to set up. So the first part is the publisher and advertiser, publisher and network side, which will be dealt with by the ad server, which is basically setting into the browser which ad has been clicked on, what domain target it's for, so which advertiser it's for, and how long to count a conversion for. So normally that would be 30 days. And then the second part is will probably be managed via Google Tag Manager, and it's setting up your conversion beacons. So in the same way that floodlights or other conversion beacons work today, I believe that will work through GTag, so there probably won't be any other or further implementation work to do as long as you have GTag in place. And the second part of that conversion API is as a reporting API. And again, they're expecting that will be consumed by Google advertising products primarily, and other ad servers, so that they will be able to give you the data they give you today, but in aggregate format. So it's just it's another step in removing that one-on-one reporting that we have had in the past, and in some cases have today. The second one is the federated learning of cohorts, which is very interesting in terms of some of the news we've seen in the last couple of days. So federated learning of cohorts is ad networks and publishers adding the browser into different groups and cohorts. So let's say you've been browsing car websites for the last 7 days. All of those car websites will be able to update and add you into a flock or a group, a cohort. And your browser will then be available for targeting on different ad servers that are working with the flock system. So the interesting part of that is that we've already seen that Google are providing a way of publishers saying, no, don't add anyone to flocks and don't use flock. And we've already seen Amazon, or there's been blog posts saying Amazon already have the blocker in place, which is super interesting in terms of how scalable this might become. If we see that it becomes really frequent and lots of publishers are blocking it from working, then it's kind of valueless, right? It might leave those smaller play content creators and publishers who are using flock, and then bigger publishers like or bigger websites like Amazon, Facebook, Guardian, they're another who've already said that they're opting out at the moment until they know more about it. That they're not adding in, and they're adding into the pool, and they're kind of keeping their data to themselves in a way. The third one is Turtle Dove, also known as Fledge. And this is the way to retarget customers. So when a customer comes to your site and they view a certain product, you will be able to add to the browser against your website a product preference and a retargeting URL, and add them into a group, a cohort for retargeting. The interesting thing is you're responsible for that group and you own that group, but you're also allowed to distribute permissions out to your partners and to your ad network. So they might also, and to affiliates. So you might be able to allow them to add people into your group for you on your behalf, so you can then later retarget them. And then the last one is the privacy budget API, which in one word, it blocks fingerprinting. It stops any server or known server from collecting enough data to personally identify you. So historically, a browser has been able to send IP address, user agent string, and enough unique information that you can get really close to one-on-one tracking without using a cookie. And the privacy budget just blocks a lot of that information from being sent. So it only sends enough information that you can use, but you can't use for identifying the customer or the user on a one-on-one basis.
Interesting. Although I had your comment sort of sparked a thought in my mind. How does, say, if let's say an Amazon is blocked it or a Guardian has blocked this new set of APIs, does that really play in the favor of the customer or not? And is this a customer-centric move or is it a business-centric move? I think those are the kind of questions that that pop up, and I believe that's exactly what the competition commissions across the world are trying to look at and answer, because it's not just Google but other businesses.
Definitely. I mean, the way that Google kind of worded it, and the Chinese walls thing I mentioned earlier, it very much seems that the Chrome team have the user's best interest at heart, and they're trying to build a system that protects the customer's best interests and their privacy and the ability to kind of identify who they are, whilst maintaining a lot of the current capability. So it kind of feels like current advertising capability. So you'd still be able to be targeted, but no one knows who you are specifically. So I think the Chrome team have the customer's best interest at heart, but it definitely feels like there's a bit of a, I guess, Google personal privacy is being used as a bit of a pawn in a big tech battle, in a way, because it feels like Facebook and Amazon are trying to keep their data and not share it with anyone else, whereas obviously previously an ad server can drop cookies anywhere. This isn't necessarily new for Amazon. They've never allowed third-party cookies to be dropped on their website. It's always been first-party Amazon cookies. So this is not new from them.
Got it. Yeah, in fact, what I've been researching recently is the fact that there are many different legislations that have been legislated in the last year or two, in fact, and they're all looking at trying to regulate big tech, as they call them, whether it is taxation on revenue to get a more fairer representation of revenue, or whether it is privacy. I think there's a general trend towards looking at big tech a little bit more closely. And I think the privacy sandbox itself is being looked at within that context of is this really helping the business get bigger, or is it helping the customer maintain their privacy? So the CMA, the European Union, the US, and the competition watchdog, the same for Germany and France, they're all opening up investigations around whether this solution actually aids privacy, or whether it is aiding privacy but also creating a monopolized ecosystem, because as you all know, Google actually has fully integrated ecosystem, right from being an advertiser to being an ad server to being the ad exchange, the DSP, the SSP, you name it. So it's interesting, and I'm curious what you think on this, because everyone has different takes on it. As I discussed earlier, I think this is probably going to have unintended consequences going forward. I believe, even though the move itself is trying to move away from being able to target individuals correctly and more accurately without consent. So with consent, sorry, you'd want, if people want to be able to target it, they should be able to give their consent to that. However, the implementing solutions like these, it may actually make the world a little bit more concentrated, whether it is towards bigger publishers or bigger advertisers or bigger ad tech companies. That's my take on it. I'm not sure where you stand.
Yeah, so I think I think smaller ad networks will probably be penalised. You know, they may kind of currently have this wealth of strategic advantage that built up through cookies, and they may lose that in some respects because they obviously can't set them anymore. They won't have that data, but they may gain from a greater wealth of data that's built into the browser, because they will have these cohorts that are kind of built up in Fledge across many different websites that their cookies never had access to. So it might even out. It's very hard to say.
But I guess then that loses the privacy battle at some level. It's an interesting space. It's an evolving space, and you know, we're definitely very much into the depths of it. I'm more of a marketer, and I look at it from a marketing perspective, and you obviously come from kind of more of the technical aspects of it. There's always going to be a different debate, and I hark back to the first question we asked on this session, which is, would you consider changing your browser? And even people who know the ins and outs of the technology are still 50-50. And that's interesting for me because I think there's a lot of uncertainty here, but change is coming, whether it's in 6 months or 8 months or 9 months it is. And we all need to be prepared for it.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, I think.
Well, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
No, sorry, Karen. That's it.
No, complete your thought.
No, it's gone. It's not relevant. It's cool. Cool, guys. Thank you. Thanks everyone for joining.
Yes, thank you for joining. And I think we have 8 minutes to go, and we have a couple of questions, so we can probably take maybe 1 or 2, depending on time. So the first one is that would it have an impact on the revenue model for advertisers and publishers as third-party cookies go away? Oliver, do you want to take that one?
Yes, potentially. I mean, systems that use third-party cookies today, they will have an impact. Although, if those advertisers, publishers, and systems elect to use the Google systems, the Google APIs, then they should be able to maintain the majority of their revenue streams.
Got it. And I have actually one more question, which is on technologies that companies currently have installed in-house. Things like various data management platforms which use third-party cookies to then do advertising buys in the broader ecosystem. How do you think those platforms would survive, or will they even survive?
I think many of them will be impacted pretty badly. Not going to mention any names, but some of those systems, or a lot of those systems, are connected together. So if you think about when you deploy a DMP, you're probably deploying multiple DMPs because they all work together in one big network, and they're all connecting their own cookies together. So if you don't have the cookies, you've got nothing to link together, and you'll basically have nothing. And like I mentioned earlier, some of those providers are segueing into becoming customer management platforms to kind of maintain their revenue streams and open up new doors for business. And I think that would definitely continue. The likes of Telium, for example, you know, they've done a great job in expanding from a tag management system into a kind of personalization engine, and now they're advertising themselves as a CDP. So as these CDP offerings grow, you know, they're going to get more attention and bring in more business for those tech companies.
Sounds good. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have one, another area that I think is worth mentioning, which is the relationship between consent management and cookieless. So consent management today typically we think about consenting to a cookie being set on your device. And if all the cookies go away, then you potentially don't have as much to consent to. So I'm hoping that a kind of byproduct of this is these nasty pop-ups will disappear eventually. It's wishful thinking, but you know, I'm hoping that might be a byproduct of it.
I agree. That's visual thinking.
Probably, yeah.
Great. I think hopefully this session was useful to all of you. And again, both Oliver and I are reachable through our LinkedIn profile. We will be circulating an email after the session. Do let us know if you have any questions, clarifications. We'd be happy to get in touch. Yeah, this is an area that we live and breathe, and we would definitely love to help you in your business as you need help navigating this big change. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Have a good afternoon.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.